Welcome to the Holistic Wealth Podcast, and I'm your host, Keisha Blair, and today we have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Nicole LePera, and she is a holistic psychologist. She received traditional training in clinical psychology at Cornell University and the New School of Social Research, based on her hugely popular Instagram account at The Holistic Psychologist. Dr. LePera has continued to expand her reach through her free daily content and membership-only learning site, sharing her tools for transformation with an ever-growing community of self-healers. And also recently published her latest book is How to Do the Work. And it's such an important topic as we're in this pandemic. Nicole, welcome to the Holistic Wealth Podcast. It's amazing having you here.
Thank you so much for taking your time and energy to have me, Keisha.
Absolutely. So I've been following along for about a year now on Instagram, and of course with my own personal journey of healing after tragedy and grief. I've taken an interest in your philosophy and your group and your movement and all of that, and I'm so happy to have you here to talk about those topics today, especially around, like the trauma of money. So Nicole, can you just give us like a brief introduction to how you, started around this philosophy? I think you veered a bit off the traditional path a bit, and I just wanted to hear just a bit about that before we dive into money topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And very similar to, I think, what I'm hearing from your journey. It was my own journey, my past, my work as a clinical psychologist, and of course, my continued journey of change that has really inspired the way that I work now. So as long as I can remember, I was a human who very much struggled with anxiety. I was a little girl, afraid of the world, also really fascinated with other people, what made their minds different, their thoughts different, their emotions different. So before very long, when you get to be asked, what are you going to be when you grow up? Right. I very much was marching toward the goal of being a psychologist, to understand myself, to help other humans understand themselves, and of course, to help them create change. Flash forward in time, many years of school, opened a private practice in Philadelphia where I was living at the time. It became very successful very quickly, yet very quickly, I started to feel really, really disempowered because on the personal side of things, having been in therapy, all different types of therapy myself, both personally, both through my training programs, I, as a human, even though I checked all of these boxes, I had a relationship, I had this practice, I was living in the city that I chose to live in, yet at my core, I felt so disconnected. I felt so unfulfilled in life. And I saw so many similar patterns in my clients who were now by that point coming in week after week, year after year, incredible amounts of insight. I thought myself, I had incredible amounts of insight on my own life. Yet the word that kept coming up in session after session, Keisha, was, I'm stuck. I'm disempowered. I have all of this knowledge, and yet I still go out and I do those old habits. I engage in these behaviors. I'm in relationships that aren't fulfilling and or are absolutely problematic. And for me, it was a really dark place for a while, trying to understand, why I was so unfulfilled, why I wasn't really being that successful or helping my clients. And very gratefully, my drive to learn sent me, as it does many of us, online. And I was really met with a whole wealth of other information, other knowledge, things that I didn't necessarily learn in school that very much incorporated what I now, and you very much also call, a holistic way of thinking about a human. In school, I was really just taught, mind stuff from the top down. Think new thoughts, as CBT, the gold standard, says, and you'll get a different result in your life. And now I was beginning to understand why we were actually stuck, why that actually wasn't enough to create change, because we are a whole human. We have a body. Many of us are living in a body that has trauma stuck in it that no amounts of insight and or awareness would create change. So of course, going on my own personal healing journey, beginning to implement different lifestyle tools that I now share very readily and freely online, helped me change so much that I was inspired to pivot more fully in my practice, to begin to call myself holistic, begin to work holistically. And the holistic psychologist on Instagram was born as my way of serving a community now of individuals that I know maybe also didn't have access to this information. Maybe we're living in other countries with different levels of resources. And the holistic psychologist was born about 2 years ago, and I've been marching on that journey ever since.
Wow. And it's been amazing to watch the growth too, right? Because on
Yes.
Instagram, it's now what, 4.6 million followers strong?
Yes, I think we're up to 4.8. It's incredible. And I really attest to that. So when I first went on, of course, there was a part of me that was unsure. What will people begin to think as I
Right.
now not only share myself, coming from a training system that I was taught, don't be a person, don't share your story. Clients aren't interested in that. So
Right.
I already was stepping out of this box with the intention being to share my story, because something I had learned in my own healing journey was how little I did that, how much I filtered my truth, based on what I imagined someone else would react. And if I
Yeah.
thought that my truth would upset them, my thought truth, my feeling truth, my expression, I didn't do it. So for me, that Instagram account began as almost another exercise in my healing. Can I have a space where I'm safe to be truthful, regardless of what people will think? And then, of course, there's the fear of what will people think, especially my colleagues.
Yeah.
Very early on, Keisha, I was blown away because these were now humans connecting with me, not just from the United States, where I, of course, live, but from all around the world that were resonating with whether or not it was the stuck points in my journey that I continued to talk about, or the ways that I was holistically beginning to create change. So while I think of it this way, I was the vessel, I was the channel, I was sharing one version of a story of healing, yet what I was connecting with was something that was so much more universal. And of course, that was 3 years ago. And now we've gained millions more followers since then. But I really understand it as that there's a universal truth being spoken. There's many humans, regardless of where you live, that are hearing that truth, that are resonating, and that are beginning to now feel a little bit freer to share their stories and create, as I say, the ripples really that create change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A lot of that is resonating with me because I remember when I wrote Holistic Wealth, I went through my tragedy. I said in the book, the education system, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact quote. I don't have the book in front of me. But I said the education system teaches linearity. It doesn't teach the art of recovery from disruption. And I really felt that way when, tragedy struck, and I had to find a different toolbox, a different framework from what I had been taught to address my grief and to address my tragedy. And of course, I was a young mom. I had two young kids, one just born 8 weeks prior. And it was just like, whoa, okay, how do I begin to start to, overcome this? So I'm really interested in your story and, the work that you do with the self-healers movement. And of course, just diving into the topic of money trauma, because you touched on childhood trauma, which is so important. And we've had in the past on this podcast too, another guest who's a subconscious specialist. She's a subconscious healer, Jena Sophia. And she mentioned that, as individuals, we start to kind of have views around money and, in terms of our emotions from as early as 7 years old. That money trauma starts early, much earlier than we even think. And so I just want to ask you, Nicole, can you tell us how that works? What are the kinds of impacts that would have on a child? Let's say if a child is experiencing, parents arguing about money or scarcity in an environment, growing up in poverty, or, just experiencing um, an environment around them that seems unstable, seems insecure, and does not seem nurturing. Can you tell us how that side of things would impact a child from so early?
I think it's important in hearing you've had a subconscious specialist on. Let's start there with why the subconscious is so powerful. And then I'll kind of backtrack
Right.
to money and the beliefs and the experience that then gets stored in that subconscious. So the reason why we're stuck, that word I kept recycling earlier, is because so many of us are living from that subconscious, let's call it autopilot. I think a lot of listeners probably are familiar with that. The very habited and patterned way that most of us go about life, right? It's that very cliched example of, oh, I'm driving my car on a route, maybe to or from work that I just know. I could be so lost in thought, right? Rehashing the argument I had with my partner, not really even paying attention to needing to turn right at that light, that stoplight. Yet my car, my body just does that. That's a really prime example. And of course, autopilot exists beyond driving our car. there's life that most of us live from that subconscious part of our mind. Now, of course, depending on the research you read, and the percentage doesn't really matter, though upwards of 80-90% of our day, we're allowing that autopilot to make decisions for us. So when we're stuck, what usually has happened is we're dropped into all of those habits and patterns that we began to repeat since childhood. And that conscious awareness that I kept talking about, the insight, oh, I know all of these things I'm going to do differently the next time this happens.
Right.
That actually comes from a different part of our brain entirely. So the issue becomes, I have all of this awareness, yet when I go to live my life, more often than not, I'm allowing my autopilot to call the shots, which is why most of us find ourselves reliving a version of what I call Groundhog's Day, right? The same thing day after day, which of course gets really disempowering, especially as you begin to have much more insight that that doesn't work anymore. So, okay, what's in this autopilot now? In our subconscious, like you were very beautifully saying, aren't just the things that we do. It's the things that we've repetitively thought. And of course, all of this originates in childhood. Our most formative years are actually supported by a different way that our brain is forming, is firing. We are in this open, wide-eyed state of absorption. We're learning, to put it really simply and silly in a way, how to be human. And we are so impacted by the environment around us. We're taking in all of this information. We're learning essentially how to think by hearing what other people think, by receiving or not, like by having space to share our thoughts. We definitely learn how to navigate emotions in those earliest relationships. And each of those things really begin to form into beliefs that we then carry about ourselves, about others, about the world, about our relationships. Let's include now about money. So when we then flash forward in time, our environments for a lot of us change. Our relationships change. We're in them with different characters, maybe living in a different state even, yet those beliefs are still at our core. And those beliefs then become a filter that we continue to now see our adult environment through, which continues to then validate these beliefs. So in childhood, when safety, when is so incredibly important, we are a being, a mammal that needs a caregiver of some sort to care for us. We're not born self-sufficient. We actually wouldn't continue to live if someone didn't show up in service of meeting our needs, our physical needs. When are we hungry? When are we thirsty? Do we need to go to sleep? Do we need to be burped or changed? And again, the needs get more complicated as we go into our emotional world. And when we don't have a consistent person to come up, or when we're in an environment that isn't consistently safe, because maybe we're being physically violated, maybe our physical needs can't be met because there's no money in the bank account to buy the food to then be fed. So now we're already in a position of not feeling safe. And when we don't feel safe and when our needs aren't getting met, we do then enter into a traumatized, for lack of a better word, because that's what it is, a state. Our nervous system becomes activated. We need help then in creating safety for ourselves. So money, just kind of honing in on that a bit more, money is really connected to our survival for many of us. Before we're even talking about the beliefs about money, the amount of money in the bank account translates to, do I have a roof over my head? Do I have food that my caregiver can now be attuned and show up and feed me when I need that? And if the answer is no, we're already now in a much more insecure, unsafe environment because we don't have money. And then, of course, we have parents who have their own beliefs about money. So even if there's money in the bank account, a lot of the generations many of us came from, right, came from other adults, right? We're all humans raised by humans who didn't have money security. So even if there is money in mom's, say, bank account, mom might not be safe, might not feel comfortable having that money because she's lived a trauma in her childhood, right, of not having money and of not having resources. So directly, indirectly, money is really connected, if we want to simplify it, to survival. And when we don't feel like we're safely surviving, we do carry then that trauma. It lives in our bodies, it lives in our beliefs, and then it lives in our relationship with money as we age.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about ancestral money blocks because that came up in that episode that I referenced earlier. And, we spoke about these ancestral money blocks. And it's so amazing, Nicole, that you brought up something similar, because I've had so many guests on the podcast, especially when we get around to talking about the personal financial identity quiz, that they've said, well, my grandparents lived through World War II, or they lived through the Holocaust, they were refugees and had to flee, or live through slavery. And it's unbelievable. I'm so intrigued with the topic, and I want to get your views on that, because, of course, we also talked about epigenetics and how the transfer from, mother to child in the womb. And I'm just absolutely, I've been blown away. And so I want to get your views on that. And of course, in terms of, the self healers, what do we then, how can then we move forward to heal ourselves? Like once we develop the self awareness that, okay, there's lots coming, down through that medium. But then how do I get a hold of myself to then realize that I might have these blocks to then heal? So like, I know that's like a 3-part question, but yeah, I'd love to get your views.
I love it. And I love that you're kind of have had conversations about epigenetics. For me, when I went online and I discovered even that concept, it was not even something that was offered to me in school. What I was taught was, what I refer to now as the old model, which has been known as genetic determinism, or really simply, my genes create my life, from my physical health to my mental health, to my personality, to my direction in life.
Right.
Now we know that epigenetics, of course, incorporates genes. We're all born with, similar genetics to the people that we share DNA with. Mm-hmm. However, and you spoke it beautifully when you started to talk about in utero, our mother, our first environment. So simply what epigenetics says is our genes interact with our environment, mm-hmm. with the safety or lack thereof, with the needs that we're having met or not having met, with the choices that we're making and how we're caring for our bodies, navigating our environment and our relationships. And that earliest environment begins in utero. Mm-hmm. And so between our genetics and now our environment, that interaction creates our health, our mental wellness, and our way of being in the world that some even, again, call personality. So back in time, we were all carried in another human body, right? And that human body had its own hormones coursing through it, had its own beliefs raised by, again, the generations that came before. Right. So very similarly, I was born to 2 older parents. My mom was 42 when she had me. My dad was 45. So they were born in 37 and 40 years. Yeah. And so right around, post-depression era, my mom was from a very small town in upstate Pennsylvania with very few financial resources. And my dad was a 2nd-generation immigrant from Italy, from, again, a very low resourced region. Just came over. There was a lot of children in the family. So both of them entered into a relationship and had their own beliefs around scarcity and money. And we don't have enough after, again, having lived that experiences themselves. My mom has shared really heartbreaking stories with me of Christmas and no Christmas presents under the Christmas tree until one aunt had gifted her a pair of boots that then her mom made her return. So a lot of lack. And then came into that with my dad, very similar based thoughts around lack. Money trauma creates stress. So when my mom was carrying me and resources were short as they were, as my sister struggled with medical illness as she did, and my dad had to work 3 jobs so my mom could stay home and care for her, sick child or care for their sick child, money was tight. And so now you have baby Nicole, right, in a stressed out body. Right. Think about that. We have a mother now navigating the world, navigating their own scarcity or lack of resources. Again, whether or not it's real, living in their bodies, maybe from generations prior, impacting my developing self. So, of course, the environment then extends when we're born, just like we talked about. How are our needs being met? Are they, aren't they? What are the beliefs that are being passed on? Do you have parents who are actually directly telling you what money is or what it isn't? Are they saying, certain things, or are they just being? Are they indirectly passing these messages on? Are they always hoarding money and never really spending it? And we're taking all of that in. And again, that continues to impact us and impact our relationship with money so shifting into now, what do we do about it? Right. Until we become conscious until we begin to then explore. And for a lot of us, this begins to happen as we enter into adulthood, ourselves, our own habits around money, our own thoughts around money. What is a belief? I used that word earlier. A belief began as a practiced thought. So we can envision our beliefs by paying attention to our thoughts. What are you telling yourself about money? Most of us have interactions in either a direct way with money now throughout the day or an indirect way. We're just thinking about money. So as we become conscious, we can then begin to witness that autopilot that we had just spoken about. What are your money habits? What are then the choices that you're making around your money habits that are maybe continuing that scarcity, that money-based trauma in your life? And if that's the case, I always talk about a two-step process to change. The first is always becoming conscious. What's keeping me stuck? What are the habits and patterns that aren't serving me? And then once I begin to become conscious of those, I gift myself within the opportunity to take that second step, which is begin to make new choices. And this is what I kept coming up against in terms of the old model of thinking different thoughts and trying to create change doesn't really work. This is where we actually have to create a new relationship with money, practice new thoughts about money, learn how to relate to money in a different actionable way to then create change in our relationship with money.
I just think it's timely here because I know you took the personal financial identity quiz that I developed, and I wanted to get your views on that just because you were talking about your personal story just now, having been born into the environment that you did. Could you tell us what your results were and how you rewrote your money story? Because you mentioned that a while ago, and I thought, wow, I have to ask this now because it's something that I also advocate for everyone to do. But I know people are just like, well, how do I do that? I don't know how to do that and to really do it in a meaningful way. So if you could just share with us your results and how you went about this conscious process.
Absolutely. And it is such an empowering process. And I just want to acknowledge how possible it is to rewrite any story. Of course, you and I are talking about a money story. If you want to go really macro, my work is about rewriting your future story. Yes. Right. And a lot of us, again, are bound by that old way of thinking that we can't. We were born genetically like this. Our personality won't allow us. Our resources won't allow us. We're stuck. Our beliefs keep us stuck. So that's why I said when I met epigenetics and that concept, that didn't blow open a door of empowerment for me by any stretch. It cracked it open because there was a very deep part of me that didn't even believe it. I read all of these empowering stories of people changing their physical health, changing their emotional health, changing the way their life looked. And there was a very deep part of me that was like, okay, they did that. I'm going to find all the reasons why it won't work for me. I didn't believe it. And that's why I jokingly say the door cracked open a bit. And it was through the process of actually, like we were just talking about, embodying the work to create the change that then over time I came to believe in that empowerment story, that it is genes plus choices. Right. And now I continue to focus on making the choices that are more in alignment with the future that I want. Though hearing, and I love your work to the extent of we can change any story. And for so many of us, Keisha, the money story really keeps us bound to our past and to trauma. So your work out in this world is so incredibly important. So when you sent me the quiz and I sat down to take it, I was really interested. I was really like wondering and curious about what would I come up with? I don't know if I've ever taken a very specific, kind of money mindset type quiz like that. Right. And I very much know that my past and my old belief system was very much one in scarcity. So I was very interested to see what would come up. And the result that I got, I believe it was something called a risk-taking entrepreneur. Now that struck me for a couple reasons. Yeah. The first being, I never in a million years would have resonated or related to that title of entrepreneur. Even though, yes, I now have a business, a very successful one. Yes. I was not raised with watching or witnessing entrepreneur in my family. My brother at different points tried to open restaurant type businesses. It wasn't though something talked about or embodied. What was talked about more so was strong suggestion and urging to find security. Yes. That was the word that would come up in my family. the job, the 9 to 5, the
Right.
great paycheck. My dad worked for Amtrak. He has a great pension to this day. I heard about that since
Right.
I was very young. Find the stable, the secure employer and make sure that you have money coming in, at all times. So what I saw and what my dad lived and what was urged to me in both direct and indirect, statements throughout life was security, not vision, not creativity, not the other word that really struck me, risk, not go out on your own. As I started to evolve into my career and I started to share with my family that my work would look like a private practice that I ran on my own. I mean, their head might as well have started to spin. I mean, they were very supportive, on the surface. They always very much wanted me to go do what I wanted to do, though I know that they were always, how many clients do you have? Oh, you're going on vacation for how many weeks? Will you be okay financially if you take that much time off and you don't get paid, right? It was always this kind of drive or awareness of security and of the lack of security that I was seemingly going into in private practice even.
Yeah.
So taking that quiz and seeing, that mindset and of entrepreneur and of risk taker definitely now is something that I can resonate with. Learning again how to move forward once I really realized that old practice, wasn't going to be my be all end all, even though I invested, upwards of almost $200,000 in school debt, almost 10 years of my life to do. And now I'm sitting here faced with, that's not the work I want to do anymore. Talk about taking a risk. And for me at that time, living in alignment was what was most important than just going to that security of that job that I know was giving me a comfortable life. So hearing that now, I can very much resonate with it because it did take, unlearning that belief of what security means and beginning to prioritize, other things in addition to security. And of course, it meant the practical in the middle of all of this, where I still had the practice that I was, doing on a limited basis, while I was now trying to create this other practice, this virtual practice, this teaching that is now evolved in the self-healer circle that I would eventually shift into over time. So I share that transition because for me, it wasn't just blindly saying, oh, I'm going to quit the job, because I couldn't do that. I was married. I still am married. I had I was the financial resource in the household. I just couldn't do that. Though risk-taking, going out, living in alignment, creating your own business, again, not things I was modeled or taught, things that actually I was maybe even taught to avoid, really then came into my life and began to be something I embodied by doing the work of healing. This is why it all comes back. And I love our conversation because money for so many of us is at our core and is the bind that keeps us from being able to realize our passion, our purpose, and live into that, because we don't have the security. We do have all of these beliefs that we can't take a risk and create the business that really is what our heart is saying, because of, again, all of the things that we were told or experienced around money.
Absolutely. And there's so much wrapped up in that as I'm listening to you and I'm here nodding. And, it's so funny because I think, I hear you talk about the security and that kind of tension between having the security and wanting to pursue the passion, which is, I think, a lot of the tension that we first feel as entrepreneurs stepping out. And then, of course, you're raised to go after that security. And, even as parents, how do we be more conscious in our parenting? You mentioned your parents and that security and pushing that. And I think so many of us can relate to that because I had that too. And then at a certain point, you realize, but this isn't my passion. This is, yes, it's making me comfortable in life, but this isn't necessarily. And especially when you go through a tragedy or, you go through something like COVID and you realize, oh my gosh, my mission is actually to do something else. And then there's that tension. So how can we as parents, firstly, be more conscious in our parenting and try not to necessarily pass down these these fears and insecurities? And
this is an incredibly important question, and I get asked this a lot in different contexts, right? Here about money, we could be asked, like, how do I parent differently? I get asked different versions of that a lot. And so something to acknowledge is something I want to go back to what I said earlier, which is the reality that parents are human beings that were raised by other human beings. I am of the belief that the large majority of parents are very, if not all, are very well intentioned and are limited again by the tools that were given or modeled to them when growing up. So I just want to weave in here, before I get to my more direct suggestion for parents, the reality too, and I'm seeing a very big kind of cultural level shift, like macro cultural level shift happening around ideas like purpose, passion, creativity, and what's possible.
Yeah.
Because for many of us, especially most of us adults, our parents, were raised with very different beliefs about these things, right? Just to use one example, creative careers, for a very long time were very few and far between. So if you were a child who was an artist, right, from a very well-intentioned way, your parents might have urged you not to pursue art and maybe to like get good at math so you can go, be a doctor or an accountant or something, right? That would have a career for you at the end of it. And of course, I at least see and believe that that's shifting and changing. And with the internet and all this new technology, I'm of the hope that those type of beliefs that were very much based in the system, the reality of the system, right? School led to these certain degrees, to these certain jobs, and they were all viewed in different levels of favorability. Again, very well-intentioned beliefs that were being then communicated and passed on to our children that I think, like I was saying, on the macro, I'm starting to see those erode a little bit and a little more flexibility. And I'm very hopeful for future generations where that won't continue to be the case, right? School, your PhD, there's not just two avenues to success or financial security. We're now seeing a lot of technology that's opening up more doorways. Either way, this is where I share the advice that I don't think is all that popular among some parents. When asked about anything, how do I parent differently? I like to remind parents that children look and are impacted more by what they're witnessing you do, by how they're experiencing you and say your relationship with money, not by what you're saying, not by saying the right things, not by giving the right instructions or the right teaching, especially when they're out of alignment with what you're doing. Your child is always going to be more impacted by what you're doing than what you're saying. So as parents out there, I strongly urge you to, just like you just said, become conscious. Parents to really witness what their relationship with money is and how it's impacting them in their daily choices, in their safety or security or lack thereof, in their ability then to show up, attuned, attentive, present to their child. And why am I saying those words? A parent who has scarcity or money trauma themselves isn't in a safe, secure space of presence to be there to impart any teaching on their child, let alone one that they want their child to understand about money. So the work begins by the parent doing the work themselves, becoming conscious of their relationship with money and creating change. And to all of the parents out there who have maybe kids that are getting older, it's not too late, right? If you've had, scarcity beliefs that maybe have impacted your child, when they were younger, it's never too late to show them change. That's actually a beautiful gift to allow your child, maybe your teen child by now, to witness you, mom, dad, or whomever you are, transforming themselves and their relationship with money. And that's the impact that will have, I believe, the greatest effect on a child than saying the right thing about money or very superficially going through the motions. Kids can pick up on it. If you don't actually change, the child is going to pay most attention to how are they experiencing you.
No, that's absolutely true. And I just wanted to pick up just to ask you one last question about what you said just now about, if you're a parent that still has that money trauma, then you're not kind of in that safe space to be able to pass on kind of these positive or, these money habits. And so, Nicole, I just wanted to ask, like, because I'm sure listeners are thinking, how can I know for sure if I have this trauma and if I'm imparting any of this? How can I assess myself then in terms of my money habits? I know for, because on this podcast, we've had so many money experts and for sure, when we look at things like debt levels and on out of control spending, I mean, for sure, those are signs. But are there any others that you can think of that have to do with like the emotional side or the mental side that you can think of that people are like, oh yeah, that's true. That might be one thing that, I have to look out for. Is there anything like that that you can tell us about in terms of looking out and being more conscious about?
100%. So, outside of just the objective, how much money, is present, how consistently does money come into my life? How do you think about money? Right? What thoughts about money when you do exchange money, or are thoughts about money constantly on your mind from morning, noon, and night? If
Yeah.
that's the case, if you're always thinking about money you have, money you don't have, bills you have to pay, again, that might be an indicator of a money trauma. The more hyper focused we are on any topic, on any subject, usually, indicates a trauma based belief, because we become hyper vigilant when we feel threatened. So for a lot of us, right, that means it might not be, actively money thinking. It just might be an awareness. Oh, is coming on Friday. Oh, I can't buy this. How much is money present in your life? So that's one thing to think about. How is it when you hear people or experience people sharing their beliefs about money? Can you hear people who have different beliefs than you about money? This is another time we can see a reactivity, right? If I have a scarcity based money belief and I might hear someone talking about money mindset or changing your mindset or abundance based belief, do you react really negatively? Do you shame or criticize that person for sharing what their experience might be?
Mm-hmm.
When we lash out when someone's sharing a different belief or experience and we try to shame them or squash them or make them wrong, again, a lot of times that's evidence that there's something deeper going on for us. Do you have just a big emotion anytime money comes up? Can you not tolerate it? Is there maybe an absence of talk about money? Do you avoid it entirely? Do you never think or talk or share about money at all? That's another right indicator that something might be going on. Anytime we have a really big reaction, a really big thought, repetitive thoughts, repetitive feelings, and or again, we react really strongly when someone's sharing an opinion of difference, usually that's an indicator that there's something deeper going on. And here's the opportunity that I want to offer everyone who's resonating with any of those examples to not shame yourself in that moment, to not feel badly, right? The work, and when we're talking about consciousness, it's really learning how to just be, I used the word witness earlier. I want to use the adjective in front of that, an objective witness, just to see it. Because seeing it, like we just talked about, being conscious of it is the first step of empowerment to actually then allow you to begin to make new choices. A lot of us, though, we see it and then we become shameful about it. Seeing it, though, is actually on the road to changing it, as far as I say. See.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And such wise words there, Nicole. And this has been tremendously, tremendously useful and insightful. And I'm sure so many people have, takeaways and have, work to do around hearing these different concepts and integrating them in their own lives. Like I'm thinking about, as you were talking, I was like, yeah, that's the anxious spender, constantly thinking about money, constantly thinking about, when it's coming in or when it's going out. And so thank you so much for being here, for sharing with us. I'm going to give you, that space to kind of tell us about any last parting words that you may have, because there's so much we could have covered, and there's so much around this that is needed, especially during COVID-19, when we're all in a state of collective trauma, I think, which is one thing I wanted to, ask you about, which is, like when you're in this state for this long and we're all faced with this trauma.
Absolutely. And I think, touching just quickly on COVID-19 or any time. I mean, I just opened membership to the Self Healer Circle, and we gave a whole handful of scholarships out to humans from Turkey, really being aware of the economic impact that, their dollar and their currency is having on their ability to live really life in any stretch, in any way. So thinking collectively, there are moments in time. I mean, we're living one quite globally now, where most countries are impacted by COVID. Most for the impact for a lot of us does then trickle down to financial. We're losing jobs. We're not able to go to jobs because we're, COVID positive and we need to take the predetermined time off. And again, some of us are in countries where government structures are passing regulations that are changing our finances or their finances very, very quickly. And anytime a group, any size of the group is impacted, again, at that level of security, there's trauma involved, there's challenge involved. And for a lot of us, when we have already carried this financial trauma from our childhood, it really exacerbates it. It makes it really, really difficult to navigate. So as a past, it's funny. I wish there was some way that, a decade ago, I could have taken that financial quiz. Because I wondered if I would have gotten the anxious spender type, because I always had my partner Lolly would tease me. I always had a running tally of how much money we had in the bank.
Yeah.
Anytime she would ask or we had to purchase something, she'd say I would almost turn white like a ghost, or she had to ask or say that, we need this in the fridge or we're out of this. She'd be like, I'd be afraid to, because she was attuned enough to see the look in my face. And I'd be like, okay, sure. Hand the card over, doing the math, knowing that would leave us, how much that would leave us, right? All the time. And again, I'm sharing that to say, and to honor everyone who is even tuning in to this conversation, to your podcast, for the curiosity, the bravery, right? Of even thinking about these new thoughts, because there was a time, like I shared with you, from my anxious spender self, that would hear people talk of abundance and creating it. And again, I didn't believe it was true for me. How could it be?
Right.
All I saw was my money going down. I never kind of got to this place of what felt like security. I didn't believe it was possible. So I wanted to share that as a parting hope for anyone out there who needs it, that true deep level change is so possible. It doesn't happen overnight. I'm never going to sugarcoat it and say that it's an easy journey, though it's a journey that begins, like many of you took, even in making the choice to tune in to our conversation here today, with being curious, with hearing a new idea, and with maybe over time beginning just to look. Maybe, for instance, the first step for many of you listening, just look, begin to become conscious of what is your relationship with money in adulthood. Start now, right? What are your interactions? What are your thoughts? How do you feel about it? And again, to share the hope that you can create, regardless of what you see and how comfortable what you see is, uncomfortable what you see may be, there is so much change that can happen. And it starts with those small promises, those small steps that we can begin to take each and every day. So I want to honor everyone listening, and you. Thank you again, Keisha, for taking the time. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's an interesting thing to think about, because like I said, money, healing, subconscious, all of this is so connected to the work that I talk about each and every day. And money is in the fabric of our society. It's a tool for life. So your beliefs and your relationship with money, again, that are impacted by those earliest experiences, really do shape the life that you're living, and you can then become a creator of a different future.
Absolutely. And those are great words, Nicole. And so can you just tell our audience where to find you on your website and social media?
Absolutely. So each and every day you can find me on Instagram at the.holistic.psychologist. There's a YouTube channel where I put out videos every Sunday, short teaching videos. I have a new podcast called The Self Healer's Soundboard. So many places, so many things. I'm trying to think of what else might be helpful. The Self Healer Circle, my online global membership. We did just open this past month, so we'll be opening again in May. All of that information, including an email list so you can stay connected to any new projects coming up, can be found on the website, theholisticspsychologist.com.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much once again for joining us. This was an amazing chat. I had so much fun, and it's a topic that, as I said, I just love. I love this topic so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you again for having me so much, Keisha.